Hello, this is a short video on the roster and random sampling plan for the Central Florida Healthcare Patient Survey Project. Now on the project guidelines, you'll notice that for this project we have 540 surveys per quarter to be completed, and these are for the medical and dental departments, and this is randomly stratified by site. What that means is that each site needs a specific number of surveys over the course of the quarter. The one thing that you don't want to do is get all of the surveys for any site in any 1 week or even month. We want to do our best to spread out the surveys amongst all the sites every week so that every site has a repetitive sample throughout the entire 10 weeks of the quarter. You'll see that breaking this down over the 10 weeks comes out to about 54, 55, as many as 60 surveys per week over the quarter so that you can really spread out that sample and make sure that you're still staying on pace. Now when we look at the roster, you'll see that you do have the centers listed here. These are, again, the most important things to keep your eye on. Now because there are 21 centers and 54 surveys per week, you're going to want to get about 2 to 3 surveys per center each week. That way you can keep it really even and spread it out until you get to the later parts of the quarter where you can really start zoning in on centers who do still need more surveys because they have larger counts to reach by the end of the quarter. The patient name and phone number, which I have hidden here, will be available to you, as well as the patient's age. You're going to want to be sure to pay attention to the age and also gender of the patient so that you're referencing, the patient themselves, the child patient, Mrs. Patient, Mr. Patient, etc. You will have the specialty listed here as well as the provider name. Now, you'll want to be sure that you notice how many providers are appearing for each location, and this will get easier for you as the quarter goes on because you'll be receiving those count update emails, but you want to try to balance the providers within each location so that if there are 4 providers in a location, they each have about the same number of surveys as each other at the end of the quarter. Some locations may only have 1 provider, and in that case, then that 1 provider would actually get all of the surveys needed for each site. So you would start here with Avon Park Dental being your very first location. Now when you start making calls, please start with the very first patient, very first provider, very first location, and you'll continue making calls, coloring in yellow for calls placed until you do reach a color green. Now when you get to a green survey, meaning that the survey was completed, that's when you start looking for the next provider in the center. Now for Avon Park Dental, it happens to be the case that Denise Gamora is the only provider appearing for that location. And so at that point, you could continue making calls for that provider until you reach the 2 to 3 for that week for that center. And at that point, you would skip to the very first patient of the very next center, and you'll start making calls for that very first provider. Now, once you do get a completed survey for the first provider, at that point, you would skip to the next provider in that location and begin at the very first patient for the very next provider. Once you've gotten your 2 surveys there, then you can skip all the way down to the next location, which happens to be Dundee. Now you'll notice that there were more providers listed here for Avon Park Medical than surveys that we completed for the week. So when you receive your roster in the next week, instead of making more surveys for Camber Vasquez and for John Floristal, instead you would start with the first patient for Sonia Kosick so that you can, again, balance out those surveys within the providers so that each one has about the same number. This will help you spread out that sample throughout all of the providers. And once you've cycled your way all the way through the roster and you've reached your 54 calls for the week, then you can upload your KCs and rosters and, again, begin in the next provider for each location in the next week. If you have any questions, please be sure to let me know. Thank you.